Welcome to the deep dive. We've got this article somebody sent in. It's called Humanity's Biggest Fight Isn't With Each Other. It's with its own ignorance.
Yeah.
And boy, is it a thought-provoking one.
Well, right. It really connects all these huge issues we're dealing with, like climate change denial and the spread of all that misinformation.
And it basically argues that ignorance is like the root of it all, huh?
It really does.
Right away, like from the first paragraph, they hit you with this image of Earth as like a spaceship.
Okay.
And the spaceship has a hole in its hull.
Okay.
And that hole represents ignorance.
Oh, wow.
So like the ship is literally falling apart, but the crew is too busy arguing about who gets to sit
Oh, my goodness.
in the best seat.
Wow. It's so,
I mean, kind of puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
That's a powerful analogy, yeah. It really highlights how we tend to get caught up in these little conflicts and totally miss the bigger picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that actually ties into some pretty fascinating cognitive biases. See, our brains are hardwired to focus on immediate threats.
Right.
The kind of stuff our ancestors faced, like a saber-toothed tiger about to attack. Right.
Yeah.
But a slow-burning crisis like climate change
Yeah.
just doesn't trigger that same immediate fear response,
Yeah.
even though it's a way bigger threat long-term.
Right. Like it doesn't feel as urgent, but it really is.
Exactly.
The article also makes the point that, ignorance isn't always just about how our brains are wired.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a choice. Right.
It can be.
Like think about the tobacco industry.
Mhm.
They knew smoking was bad.
Right.
Like, for decades.
Yeah.
But they chose to downplay the risks to protect their profits. I mean, that's like a pretty clear example of choosing to ignore the truth, right?
Absolutely. And the article argues that we see the same thing happening today with climate change. It's not that people don't know the science. It's that they're actively choosing to ignore it because it's inconvenient or it goes against their beliefs.
So it's like we're choosing comfort over facing these harsh realities, huh?
Kinda, yeah.
But then, like, why are so many people choosing to ignore it? Is it just, like, stubbornness?
Well, I think there's definitely some of that, but the article makes a really good point about how complex the world has become.
Okay.
I mean, our lives are so intertwined with these crazy systems like global trade, digital networks, all these supply chains, right?
Right.
And most of us don't really understand how they work.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I have no clue where half the stuff
I know, right?
in my house even comes from.
Right.
Or how my phone even works, to be honest.
Exactly. And the article says all this complexity actually creates the perfect conditions for misinformation to spread.
Okay.
Like, when things are so complicated and confusing, it's just easier to believe simple explanations, even if they're false.
So it's like the more complex the world gets,
Yeah.
the more tempting it is to oversimplify things. And hold on to those simple narratives, even if they're not true.
Yeah, it's like a coping mechanism almost.
Wow. That's a pretty scary thought.
It is. And that actually leads us to this idea. The article talks about the Anthropocene.
Okay. I've heard of that term, but I'm not really sure what it means.
It basically refers to the current geological age, the one where humans are like the dominant force shaping the planet.
Okay.
Think about it. We're impacting everything. The climate, the oceans, even the air we breathe.
Wow. When you put it like that,
Yeah.
it really makes you realize the scale of our impact.
It's huge.
But it also kind of feels like we're still acting like that crew on the spaceship, arguing over who gets the comfy seats while the whole thing is about to blow up.
That's a great analogy because that's basically the point the article is making. We have all this power to change the planet,
Right.
but we don't necessarily have the wisdom to use it responsibly.
It's almost like, what, giving a toddler the keys to a nuclear reactor or something?
Exactly. A terrifying thought, right? So the question is, if we have all this power, but not the wisdom, what's the solution? How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah. What is?
Well, according to the article, the answer is knowledge.
Okay.
But not just any knowledge. It's about understanding how these complex systems work and recognizing that everything is connected.
Okay.
It's about moving beyond simple cause and effect thinking.
Right.
And embracing a more, I guess you could say, holistic understanding of how the world works.
Right. How do we actually do that? How do we cultivate that kind of knowledge on a global scale?
Well, The article says it starts with a fundamental shift in our education systems.
Okay.
We got to move away from rote memorization and standardized testing
Uh-huh.
and move toward an approach that prioritizes critical thinking,
Correct.
problem solving, and what they call systems thinking.
Systems thinking, huh? What's that?
Basically, it's the ability to see the bigger picture, understanding how individual choices fit into the larger system.
Okay.
Like take climate change, for example.
Uh-huh.
It's not just an environmental issue, right?
Right.
It's economic. It's about social justice. It's political.
It's everything.
You can't just focus on one part.
Right.
You need to understand how they're all connected.
So instead of just looking at the individual trees, we got to see the whole forest.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also sounds like a pretty big shift from how most of us were taught.
It is a big shift, but the article says it's a shift we need to make if we're going to deal with all the complex problems of the 21st century. And it's not just about changing what we teach. It's about changing how we teach.
Okay.
We need to create a learning environment that encourages curiosity and asking questions and working together.
I like that. It's like instead of just absorbing information,
Yeah.
we need to be actively engaging with it, challenging it, using it to solve problems.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, the article points to some really interesting historical examples. Okay.
Like, think about the eradication of smallpox, a disease that killed millions.
Right.
We were only able to get rid of it because we chose to trust science instead of giving in to fear and ignorance.
What about the ozone layer? That was another big one we managed to fix, right?
Exactly. We recognized the problem, understood the science, and then took action together to ban the chemicals that were destroying it. It shows that we can overcome these huge challenges when we choose knowledge and act on it.
Those examples are really encouraging. Like, maybe we can beat this ignorance thing after all.
I hope so.
But the article doesn't just talk about knowledge in a general sense.
Right.
It also goes into this very specific problem of misinformation.
Oh, yeah.
Which feels like a real epidemic these days.
It does. And it's not a coincidence that the rise of misinformation happened at the same time as the internet and social media.
Mm-hmm.
These technologies are amazing, don't get me wrong. They give us access to so much information.
Yeah.
Connect people all over the world.
Right. But they've also made it way easier to spread lies, propaganda, and conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it feels like for every reliable source of information out there,
Right.
there's like 10 that are just pushing fake news.
It's tough to know what to believe these days.
It really is.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to know what's true anymore?
That's a tough question. And the article offers some strategies for dealing with this crazy information landscape. One of the most important is critical thinking.
Critical thinking. I hear that term a lot. But what does it actually mean in practice?
It basically means being a more careful and thoughtful consumer of information.
Okay.
Like asking questions, checking your sources, and watching out for stuff that just confirms your biases.
So being skeptical, but in a good way. Not just rejecting everything, but learning how to filter out the noise.
Exactly. And that's more important now than ever because we're bombarded with so much information all the time.
I know, it's overwhelming.
But critical thinking by itself isn't enough. The article also highlights the importance of curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yes, that natural human desire to explore.
I like that.
Ask questions. And understand the world.
But how do we encourage that in a world that feels so, I don't know, overwhelming and kind of discouraging sometimes?
That's a great question. And that's actually something we'll dive into more deeply in the next part of our deep dive. The article has some really interesting ideas about how we can reignite that spark of curiosity, both in ourselves and in others.
Okay, so we'll have to wait for part 2 for that.
Yeah.
But for now, I think it's a good reminder that curiosity might be one of our best weapons in this fight against ignorance.
I agree. The article goes even further, saying that curiosity isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about developing a certain mindset, one that embraces uncertainty and sees learning as a lifelong journey.
That's a beautiful way to put it. I think that's a perfect place to leave off for now.
It is.
We'll explore the article's concrete strategies for fostering curiosity and turning knowledge into action in the next part of our deep dive. So, before we went to that little break, we were talking about how curiosity might be one of our most powerful tools in the fight against ignorance.
Right. It's a powerful tool.
I am really curious to hear what the article has to say about how we can actually cultivate more of it.
Well,
in our own lives.
It makes a really interesting point, actually. It says that curiosity might be more about unlearning than learning.
Okay.
Like letting go of the idea that we need to have all the answers and being okay with the fact that there's always more to learn.
I like that. It's almost like we need to give ourselves permission
Yeah.
to be a little bit more childlike, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were kids, everything was new and exciting, and we weren't afraid to just ask why
I know.
all the time.
It's true. The article actually uses that example
Oh, does it?
of a child asking why over and over again.
Uh-huh.
And it points out that as we grow up, we tend to shut down that kind of questioning.
We do.
But that's actually one of the most powerful tools we have for learning and growing.
Yeah, maybe it's not about becoming experts in everything,
Right.
but more about like rediscovering that sense of wonder that we may be lost somewhere along the way.
I think that's a great way to put it. And the article suggests that this kind of shift in mindset
Yeah.
can actually have a ripple effect, not just on us, but on the world around us. Imagine if everyone was a little bit more curious,
Right.
a little bit more willing to question things
Yeah.
and challenge their own assumptions.
That would be pretty amazing.
It would.
But it also seems pretty, like, daunting.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah, like how do we even start to create that kind of world?
Well, the article says it needs to start with education.
Okay.
You know, schools need to be less about memorizing facts
Right.
and more about teaching kids how to think critically
Okay.
and solve problems.
That makes sense. But it also feels like it needs to go beyond the classroom.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like how do we build a culture where curiosity is valued not just in schools, but, you know, in our workplaces, our communities, our families?
That's a great point. The article talks about shifting away from this culture that prizes certainty and having the right answer all the time, and towards one that embraces uncertainty and encourages people to ask questions even if they don't know the answers.
Isn't there a danger in that, though? Like, what if embracing uncertainty just leads to more chaos and confusion?
It's a valid concern, but the article also argues that clinging to certainty can be just as dangerous, especially in a world that's constantly changing. Think about how many times in history we've been wrong about things we were absolutely sure of.
That's true. Like, people used to think the Earth was flat, right?
Exactly. The point is, being comfortable with not knowing everything allows us to be more adaptable and open to new information, which ultimately makes us more resilient in the face of change.
I'm starting to see how all of this connects, you know?
Yeah.
Curiosity, critical thinking, embracing uncertainty.
It's all connected.
Like a whole new way of looking at the world.
It is. And the article says it's not just about knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right?
Right.
It's about using that knowledge to make the world better.
So it's about taking action, not just like sitting around and thinking.
Exactly. And the article actually gives some real-world examples of how we can turn knowledge into action.
Okay, like what?
One of the big ones it focuses on is technology.
Okay.
I know we talked about technology and misinformation earlier.
Right, right.
But the article also points out how technology can help us spread knowledge and empower people to make a difference.
So instead of just being a source of distraction and division, it can actually be a force for good.
Absolutely. Think about the internet.
Right.
It gives us access to more information than ever before. And it connects us with people all over the world who are working on the same issues.
That's true.
Yeah.
Like there are so many online communities dedicated to tackling things like climate change, social justice, poverty.
Exactly. But the internet can also be a pretty overwhelming place.
It can.
So the question is, how do we make sure technology is used to spread knowledge and understanding instead of misinformation and division?
That's a great question.
The article says we need to be more careful about how we design and use technology. Like we need to support platforms and tools that encourage critical thinking and promote accurate information.
And help people have productive conversations, right?
Exactly. We need to be more mindful of how technology is shaping our world and make sure we're using it in a way that aligns with our values.
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether.
No.
It's about being more thoughtful and responsible about how we use it.
Exactly. And the article actually takes this idea even further.
Okay.
It suggests that we need to start thinking about technology not just as a tool, but as a partner in this fight against ignorance.
A partner, huh? That's interesting.
Yeah. It argues that artificial intelligence in particular has the potential to totally change the way we learn.
Okay.
The way we solve problems and the way we understand the world.
AI is already being used to analyze tons of data,
Right.
and find patterns and make predictions that we could never do on our own.
Exactly. And the article suggests that this kind of AI-powered analysis could be really helpful in understanding these complex systems. Finding solutions to global challenges.
Yeah.
And maybe even predicting and preventing future crises.
That's pretty incredible. But doesn't that raise some questions about, the ethics of AI?
It does. Like, how do we make sure it's used for good and not for bad?
Right.
That's a crucial question. The article acknowledges that AI, like any powerful tool, can be used in both ways.
Okay.
It depends on the people who are creating it and using it.
So we shouldn't reject AI completely.
No.
But we need to be careful about how we approach it.
Exactly. And the article says we need to start thinking about AI not just in terms of what it can do, but also in terms of its ethical implications.
Okay.
We need to ask questions like, who's building this technology?
Right.
Who benefits from it?
Yeah.
And how do we make sure it's used fairly and for the good of everyone?
Those are really big questions.
They are. And sometimes it feels like technology is moving so fast that it's hard to keep up with all the ethical stuff.
It does feel that way sometimes.
But the article makes a really important point. We can't wait for all the answers before we start doing something.
Okay.
We need to be having these conversations now while AI is still being developed.
Okay.
We need to shape the future of AI instead of letting it shape us.
I'm starting to get a sense of how big and complicated this challenge really is.
It's huge.
But I also feel a little bit hopeful. Like maybe we can use our knowledge and our creativity to create a better future.
I think so too.
Even with all this uncertainty.
I think that's a really important takeaway. And the article leaves us with this message. Ignorance might be our biggest enemy, but knowledge is our greatest weapon.
I like that.
And the more we learn, the more we share what we know.
Yeah.
And the more we use that knowledge to take action,
Uh-huh.
the brighter our future will be.
That's inspiring.
The article also talks about some specific things we can do as individuals
Yeah, tell me about those.
to fight ignorance and create a more enlightened world.
Those are the parts I'm most interested in.
Yeah, those are some of the most empowering parts of the article. We'll dive into those right after this.
All right, so we're back and ready to jump into the last part of our deep dive into humanity's biggest fight.
Okay.
Before the break, we were discussing all that incredible potential of technology and AI to help us in this fight against ignorance.
Yeah.
But I'm really interested in hearing about those specific steps we can take as individuals.
Right.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by how big these global challenges are.
Absolutely.
But I think each of us can play a part in making the world, a little bit more enlightened.
I completely agree. And the article actually has a really empowering message about individual action.
Okay.
It says that even small changes we make in our own lives can make a difference and contribute to this bigger shift toward, knowledge and understanding.
Right. I'm ready. Tell me, what are some things we can start doing right now to make a difference?
It starts with something pretty simple, actually.
Okay.
It's about cultivating curiosity in our own lives.
Okay.
Kind of like rediscovering that childlike wonder about the world.
Oh, I like that.
That we might have lost touch with as we got older.
I know. It's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to be amazed by things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean we have to become experts in everything.
Right.
It's more about being open to new experiences, exploring different points of view, and questioning our own assumptions.
So basically being lifelong learners, always looking for new information and trying to understand the world a little bit better.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? What are some practical steps we can take?
The article suggests a few simple things. One is to just read more widely.
Okay.
Don't just stick to your usual authors or genres.
Yeah.
Try branching out. Explore different topics and perspectives.
That's a good one. I think it's so easy to just stay in our own little bubbles.
It is.
And only read things that we already agree with.
Exactly. And reading widely can help us break out of those bubbles and see things from different angles.
I like that.
Another suggestion the article makes is to have more conversations with people who have different views than our own.
Oh, that's tough.
I know. It can be challenging.
Especially these days, it seems like everyone's just so polarized.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's so important to be able to really listen to people who see the world differently.
It is. It's tempting to just dismiss people who disagree with us.
Right.
The article makes a good point that everyone has something to offer, and we can actually learn and grow by listening to each other, even when we don't agree.
Exactly. It's not about trying to change anyone's mind.
Right.
It's about understanding where they're coming from.
And maybe finding some common grounds. All right.
Absolutely.
So reading widely, having tough conversations. What else?
The article also says we can support institutions and organizations that are fighting ignorance.
Okay, so that could be like donating to educational charities, volunteering at a library, or just speaking up against misinformation.
Exactly. And it argues that all these individual actions, when enough people do them, can really have an impact on the world.
It's pretty amazing to think that all of us have the power to make a difference, even in small ways.
It really is. And remember, this isn't a one-time thing.
Right.
The fight against ignorance is a lifelong journey.
A journey of learning and growing, huh? So even though we might never have all the answers, we should never stop asking questions.
I love that.
Well, this whole deep dive has been really thought-provoking.
It has.
I feel inspired to, be more curious and open-minded.
That's great.
And more involved in the world around me.
I think that's a wonderful takeaway.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the article really wants us to do, to go out there and ask, what comes next?
What comes next? That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into humanity's biggest fight. We hope you enjoyed it and that it sparked a little bit of curiosity in you as well. And remember, keep ask questions, keep learning, and keep fighting that good fight against ignorance.